Hello, everyone. Let's see. Good. How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you? Happy Tuesday.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. It was so nice to have a break yesterday, huh? Well, we are in the beginning of this whole enterprise, so bear with me. Hey, Rita, I still don't have your page 2 of the city training with the score. If you could just send me that, if I cannot access it through the Google Docs. Just make sure it's the page that has the final score.
Hi, Professor. I sent you that in the last class meeting.
Huh,
the link to
funny.
the document.
You sent me a link. All right, can you send me the actual certificate, just that second page, if you don't
I'll
mind?
resend it.
I don't know why it's not coming through. I'll check, but it would be better because I already punching in the scores. All right?
Professor, I have a question. I'm
Go ahead,
sorry, Rita.
Jasmine.
I sent you the certificate and the grades
Yep.
earlier today.
I got both. It's if you check the Blackboard, you'll see it's in there already.
Okay, and then the critical thinking assignment, the test.
Yeah, that too. Everything
Perfect.
is the one thing that I haven't completely finished yet is the activities, because that takes time and you still
Okay.
have time to do that. So I will check that. But the city training, if you already sent it to me, and the critical thinking training are posted. So for the critical thinking training, those of you who took it got 2 points, as you know. And the city training, I have, how many people do I have? Let me see. I have 11. I have Jeremiah, Tara, Victoria, Alma. Rita, you'll send it to me. I know you have it because I have a question mark. I just don't have the actual number. Seaver, Jasmine. So I have you, Kim, Tyrell, and Jenny.
Okay.
These are the
Thank
people.
you.
But there is still tomorrow and half of Thursday for those of you who haven't done that. Okay. All right. Skylat, I haven't heard from you at all. Are you doing any activities for the class? Do you have any issues with the mic, Skylat? No. Where is our chat? Here's our chat. Okay. Okay. The people who are not in groups yet, what I suggest you do until Thursday, this is when we will finalize the groups, is to watch the self-introductions on Blackboard. And out of remaining people, obviously, there's already a bunch of groups that have been set up. And get together or suggest who you would like to be in a group with. At this point, we can have 2 more groups of 3 people. So if you haven't been assigned to a group yet, now is the time. Now and Thursday is the time to do so. So that is mostly for Skylet. I think she's the only one of you guys.
Professor, I just resent you the link in the email. Can you please check?
In the email. Okay, yeah, let's do that. That's easy. Right. Not yet. But we'll give it a minute. You know, it's a CSI server. Okay. All right, another minute and we'll start. If you have another question that you want to ask me, now is the good time. What we'll do, we will have a break, about 10 minutes or so in between. So an hour or maybe 55 minutes, and then a little break. Again, a time for you either to ask me questions about the content or to ask questions about logistics, whatever else you may have in mind, and I will answer. Now remember, this is the optional class, not class, the optional session, which means that if you are attending it to get your 1 point participation, you need to write something. Could be a summary of a particular point. It could be a question that you have. It could be some thinking about the topic of today, of this week, which is ethics, of course. So I'm flexible in this point. That's not just being here is not enough, but writing something is what will count as 1 point. Okay, so at this point, let me share the slides with you and we'll start talking. So if you have a question that is about clarification stuff, you are not following what I'm saying, please raise your hand and let me address it. If it's more general stuff, you could also ask it or wait until the break when we can talk. All right, can you guys see the slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So we're good. At this point, if you are, if you have it close enough, I would like you to get this flow chart either on your screen or wherever you have it. If you don't have it handy, use a piece of paper. And my first question to those of you who are ready to start working is, what did we discuss will go into that oval at the top?
That's the idea.
Yes, fantastic. Yes, Thomas, thank you. So here we decided that this is the idea. And the reason why we want to talk about it, because remember I told you that this flow chart is basically good. Victoria, Rita, Jenna, Didi, good. That's where we start our assignment number 1. In fact, that's where we'll start assignment number 2 as well. So one student emailed me saying that she wasn't sure how to approach assignment number 1, that it's not clear how it is to be done. Well, the reason why it may not be that simple is because you have to come up with an idea first. And then you have to find whether there are any interesting reports about this topic in mass media. So my next question to all of you guys is, there are 3 boxes. Just one is to the left, the other one is to the right, and the one sort of beneath that oval. I would like you to suggest in the chat, that's fine, what would go into these 3 boxes. So this is, I already said number 1, this is number 2, and this is number 3. So these are some things that feed into the idea, or one could say that they feed the idea. So you have to do something in order to get an idea. And 2 of these things will go to the left and to the right of the oval. So wild guesses are welcome. See what you can say. Okay, Seaver says 3 hypotheses. Now, these are the sources, Seaver, and hypothesis is not a source. It's the end product. Well, or the opening product. So no, ideas cannot be here either, Eileen, because idea is here in the oval. So you can't have 3 more ideas feeding into this one, right? This is the idea. Guesses? All right. Rita says research. Okay, well, this whole thing is about research. This entire flow chart is about research. So no. Data. In a way, Didi, it might work. So in number one, we can say that a source of idea is our own empirical research. Now, you guys are still in the beginning. Somebody like me who's been doing research for a while could have access to empirical research, which is not necessarily available to other people if I haven't published it. Curiosity, nice, nice. Curiosity is good, but it may not be enough. Theory, yes, in a sense, Kim. Theory, one could say, comes from number three. Data, Rita and Didi say, data will happen here somewhere in the middle because we have to collect data. So we cannot start with the data unless, of course, it comes from this empirical research. All right, I'm not going to hold you more in suspense. Let me show you. This is how we think about it, and this is how you should think about your assignment number one and ultimately assignment number two. So to get to an idea, you have to look at empirical research if there is such a thing available to you. Now, that might be an issue because you guys, like I said, are consumers and not producers. So this is good, but not necessarily good for you. But what is good for you, right, is what comes in number two, which is the library research. Now, it's not that difficult to have a library session if you need to. So library research will help you perhaps identify ideas. We had a little discussion. And finally, so that was number two. Number one, like I said, is not necessarily something that applies to you. But number three is past research. We could be you hearing about it from another class or from something else, from reading something. Some of the stuff that I will post and the stuff that's being discussed in the textbook is past research. So these two sources, past research and library research, should be the ones to guide you in coming up with an idea for assignment number one. Okay, and next week, we will come back to this box to see what goes into this box here. Okay, so we will start our Tuesday classes with going on through this flowchart so that you have an idea how it works. And the reason why we need to do that, because this is how this class is designed. When we get to the end in December, all right, technically what you would have to do in any other class, you'll have to go back and start with an idea again. And this is the joy and the sadness of being a psychologist, because there's never an end. We always come up with something new, and the cycle starts all over again. Okay, but today we're talking about ethics. Ethics is not really in any of the boxes in that flowchart, just because, well, everything is ethical in what we do. But we want to talk about two types of ethical approaches to psychology. One of them has to do with treatment of participants or subjects in our case in behavioral research, but in biomedical research as well. So that's going to be part number one, and that's the biggest part of today's class. And the smaller one will have to do with what we call responsible conduct. In this case, it's about avoiding plagiarism and cheating. Now, there is a special training for that, but it's not required for undergraduate students yet. So if somebody is interested, certainly could provide you with the link in the city training where you could look at responsible conduct. In fact, we ask even undergraduate students who are working in our labs to do the responsible conduct training to understand what it means to, not cite the sources properly. So let's start with the protection of human subjects in research first, and then at the end, we'll move in and talk a little bit about plagiarism and cheating. Okay, so ethical research practice. For us in the United States, we are guided by instructions, guidelines that have been established by American Psychological Association, APA. That's the style that I refer to when I say that you will be learning the APA style and you will be writing in the APA style. And we will start talking about it on Thursday because our time is running for assignment number 1. And also the Department of Health and Human Services. They also have a set of guidelines. We won't talk much about them because we are mostly interested in the APA ethical standard, which is ethical standard number 8. All right. But we want to start with some history. And that history for us includes 3 main events, the historical events. The first one, the one that really started this whole discussion about ethics in life and research, has to do with the Nuremberg Code. Jasmine, please go ahead.
Should we be taking notes on all of this or just go along with it?
Remember that for you to get your point, you have to write up an entry in your activities.
Like
So
a little summary on the lesson?
Right. Yeah. Either a summary, 200 words or so, or maybe ask a question or suggest something that, for example, here I'm not saying much about the Nuremberg Code. So one possibility for you would be to see what that means. Why am I referring to Nuremberg? What was it? And post that as a potential participation in the lecture. So I'm not asking you to make any notes. It's up to you. The lecture, as you know, is being recorded, so it's going to be available once the class is over. So only if something, the best way of perhaps learning, if you haven't thought about it yet, is to actively engage with the material, not just listening.
Okay.
Yes,
Thank
it was, Jeremiah is right. It was in the city training. Good. So you could get that from there. And then the only point that I want to make is that obviously 1945 is the end of the Second World War, and the Nuremberg Code comes from the Nuremberg trial when the main Nazi criminals were tried. And perhaps, I don't know if you guys know, that those of them who were found guilty were actually hanged. In those days, that's how war criminals were treated. So from the Nuremberg Code, because there were prisoners in the concentration camps, the victims who were grossly mistreated and killed, this event, perhaps for those of you who are familiar with Holocaust, that is especially severe mistreatment and abuse of Jews during Second World War. So that's the source of the Nuremberg Code. It has 10 points, and these 10 points became important for the further developments. The one that I will spend a little bit more time on is the Tuskegee syphilis study. Now, in your video component of the course, there is a relatively long lecture, I think it's about 50 minutes, by Frank Snowden, who is a Yale professor of epidemiology, who gave a talk on Tuskegee syphilis study. Now, but it's not required. It's one of the optional activities for you. That's why I want to spend a few minutes talking about it. But I strongly, strongly encourage you to listen to this because it gives us a totally new perspective on our current situation with the coronavirus. So if you're interested what's going on, I would suggest that you listen to Snowden's lecture. And then for us, at the College of in the College of Staten Island. We are located, I hope some of you know, at the location of Willowbrook Mental Institution from 1970s. And this was a very painful experience for Staten Islanders. Again, we have a documentary, and it's also posted for you on the Blackboard. And there is a book. One of my colleagues, Dr. Daryl Hill, is actually a specialist on the history of Willowbrook Mental Institution, and that's horrendous. That happened where we are. If you pass building, let's see, it's 3S, on the left, you'll see there is a sign with the number 6. That's one of the plaques that commemorates the Willowbrook Mental Institution on the campus of our college. All right, so a few minutes on Tuskegee syphilis study. Now, look at the numbers, look at the years. So this took 40 years for this quote unquote study to run its course. And that's the reason why we spend so much time on it and talk about it, because this is the catalyst of ethics as we know it today. So without the Tuskegee syphilis study, this development of ethics in biomedical and behavioral research would have been much, perhaps later, maybe not as articulated as it is. Now, you'll see that I'm basically giving you the gist of the Snowden's lecture. He says that this is probably the worst case scenario in medical ethics because, again, coming back to our current situation, it was the embodiment of racism. The idea behind the main organizer at the early stages of the Tuskegee study was the profoundly racial idea that races are biological categories. That is, the Black and the Asian races are different from the white race biologically. And socially, perhaps one could make a case for that, but biologically, and that was the premise of that study. It all started here at Macon County, as you can see here, in Alabama, right? And at that time, 1930s, the main tenants, people who lived in Macon County, were the African-American Blacks who lived there, and they toiled the land. They were in agriculture. So what happened was, in this particular situation, in Macon County, right, these people, see, they're sharecroppers, they were very, very poor. Many of them, if not most, were illiterate because of this 1930s. And at that time, this is 1928, 29, there was a non-governmental organization called the Julius Rosenwald Fund that decided to fund a study on syphilis. Now, I'm not going to show you some pictures, but if you're interested, I suggest that you go online and Google syphilis pictures. That's not a pretty picture. It's a really serious disease. Now, we can deal with it now, but not in 1930s. So it was important to study it. And the reason why the Julius Rosenwald Fund funded the study was that Dr. Perrin, who proposed the study, envisioned a program that would help eradicate syphilis in the US and obviously potentially in the world in those time, right? So there was 1 year where Dr. Perrin and his team just collected data on syphilis. And that wasn't Macon County, it was data from the entire United States. They found that the US had a national rate of syphilis about 4 for every 1,000 population. Now, if you look at African American section of the US population, that number was almost twice. It was 7.2. That is, out of 1,000 African American people, 7 and that's 7.2 is an average, had syphilis. Well, now here is the most astonishing and breathtaking number, that in Macon County, that number was 360. That is, every third person, in this case, it was African American men, every third man in that population had syphilis. That's an enormous number. The toll of this disease is incredible, both social and economic and many other. That was one of the reasons why Macon County was, as the next step, selected for the continuation of the study. But Julius Rosenwald Fund did not continue beyond 1929. So a new team came on board that supposedly was going to look at why the African American men were so much affected by syphilis. Now, this was in comparison to the Scandinavian study, and if you guys know what Scandinavia is, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden, it's all white. These days, it's a little different, but in 1930s, and they had a study of syphilis in white people that preceded this. So they wanted to compare the way syphilis affected the bodies of the white people versus the bodies of African American people, in this case, men only. So here is the person, Taliaferro Clark. I can't even pronounce his Italian name. So he was the one who started with this racial or racist hypothesis, saying that there is something about African American men that make them more susceptible to perhaps sexual misbehavior, and he called it furor sexualis. And then he also suggested that they may have deficient cranial capacity, that their IQ is not as high as IQ of the white people. And again, the comparison was between the Scandinavian results and the African American results, and he started with a hypothesis, in addition to this racist hypothesis, that in white people, syphilis affects neurological systems and they're kind of higher. And in the African American population, it's in the cardiovascular system. So that was the hypothesis. Think about our flow chart. Where would that go? In which box? All right, one of the physicians, and again, they were very cynical and very open about it, saying that the most important phase of the study was to follow these patients until they die. There was no intention to create medicine or any kind of treatment. It was to see what syphilis does to the body until the person dies. And again, it was in the open. So of course you need to recruit these people. As you can see, I call it volunteers in quotation mark, because these people were not volunteers. To reach as many of these people, the leaflets were distributed through the churches. And obviously this is where many African American people went on a regular basis. And what was in the leaflet was an ad for treatment of bad blood. And in those days, remember, these people were illiterate. The bad blood could mean anything. You have a stomach ache, bad blood. You have an ear infection, hey, bad blood, and so on. So with these leaflets, they managed to recruit quite a lot of people, and 600 of them were selected for the study. And it turns out that almost 400 of them already had syphilis. And 2 turned out to be non-syphilitic, so they served as a control group. And this is where it all happened. This is the Tuskegee Institute. There's actually now a Tuskegee University, anybody who's interested. All right, and this is the group of the Tuskegee doctors who worked with the patients. This person, Eunice Rivers, is a very important person who was the broker between the white doctors and the black participants. You needed somebody like this, and she was a nurse. So she kind of was an authority to those participants. And this picture on the right is a famous picture of a spinal tap that these people were subjected to. And in those days, it was pretty painful and unpleasant procedure. and they needed that because they wanted to have access to the spinal fluid. All right, so what happened to these people? And remember, it's 40 years, right? 1932 until it was terminated in 1972. There was an annual physical examination. There were blood tests, like I showed you, spinal taps, and in exchange, these people received aspirin. And they were thinking that they were getting treatment for bad blood. So the deception, because that wasn't a treatment, and there was no intention of treating these people. This deception was systematic and extended. That is, it kept going on for all these years. Okay? In those days, actually, there was not a very successful treatment with arsenic. Arsenic is pretty poisonous, but supposedly it was in combination with other metals, was kind of used. But in 1943, during the Second World War, the penicillin became the most effective treatment. So now 11 years into the study, there is now a remedy. And these people were denied access to penicillin. And that makes it a very, very unethical study. I call it a study. So what happened in 1972? There were people who were following this. In fact, interestingly, there were publications. So out of these people that they followed, 28 died directly from the consequences of syphilis. 100 of them died from complications that came as a result of syphilis. But that's not it. The women, the wives were infected, 40 of them, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. Imagine a baby born with congenital syphilis, and the results are atrocious. So reports are published, but nothing is happening until Peter Buxton, actually, who was a member of the team originally in the late 60s, I think 1969, came to Associated Press, this is the news agency, and gave them inside the story about what went on in that study. What happened, of course, this is 1972, there was a national scandal and lawsuit by the survivors of the study. Those who were still alive received $400,000. Sounds like a lot, but remember that these people paid with their lives and their health for participation in the study. So it was one of these stories that should never be forgotten. And that's what prompted the Beaumont report in 1974 that we'll turn to next in a minute. And Bill Clinton in 1997, who was the president at the moment, actually brought several of, in this case, 8 survivors of the Tuskegee syphilis study to the White House. And he publicly apologized to them on behalf of the American people. Again, this little clip is posted for you on the Blackboard, and I suggest you watch it because it's really important that the government took the position that the government was responsible for this atrocious study. Okay, so again, I urge you to listen to Frank Snowden's lecture, which is much more detailed than what I just told you. So here is the Beaumont Conference Center. It was in Maryland, where people from all kinds of areas of research and commerce and industry and just interested citizens came together to discuss what can be done in terms of making sure that the Tuskegee syphilis study never repeats again in this life. And the result was this Beaumont report. The most important idea was that the human participants, animal subjects, should not be used as the end for his or her own benefit, they should be used as an end to his or her own benefit and not means to some ulterior motive. In this case, supposedly the society would benefit from these men's suffering. The main three principles of the Beaumont report are here. So it's a respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So let's talk a little bit about each of them, because these three principles became the cornerstone of ethical approach to biomedical and behavioral research from 1974. And I urge you to think about how the Tuskegee syphilis study violated these three principles. So the first one is known as respect for persons, or respect for people. There are two components to that principle. One of them has to do with what's known as autonomous agent, which means you, as a participant in the study, you have a saying of whether you want to participate or not. In current modern situation, say in the past 50 years, this is accomplished with something that we call a consent form. And the consent form has to present everything that you need to know to make an informed decision of whether you want to participate in the study or not. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a second and show you one of the consent forms that I use in my lab. Obviously, I'm doing behavioral research, not biomedical. Okay, let's share a different screen with you. Okay, again, I will ask you whether you can see it, because obviously I can't tell. Can you guys see the consent form that I'm showing you? It may be a little small, but I'll make it larger. Yes, Vanessa says, okay, good.
Yeah, but can you please make it bigger?
I'll make it bigger. Yep, I will in a second. Oops. Let's go to the first page. How about now? Is it a little bigger? Can you guys see what's on the consent form? Should I make it even bigger? No?
Yeah,
Okay.
We could see it.
Okay, good. All right. Oops. So this is the informed consent. This is how we call it these days. Here we have to say what the purpose of the consent form is. Here I'm saying that this is a very simple one, and I have much more elaborate ones. If you want to participate in a research study, so I'm giving you, a participant, a chance to learn about the study and ask me questions if there's something you didn't understand. So here is the title of my study, and in this case, this was my graduate student research that has to do with learning to read, and we were interested in how people who are in the United States learn to read in Russian. Russian has a different orthographic system from the Roman-based. It's called Cyrillic. So Russian has 33 letters. Some of them, 16, look just like the English letters, but they're pronounced differently. And others don't look like anything. So for example, you can have, and I'll show it to you when I go back to the PowerPoint slides, something that looks like a little fence, sort of upside down with a tail. It says who the principal investigators are. In this case, I was the mentor of my graduate student, so I am the principal investigator. It tells my participants where it's going to take place, the study location, good old days, my eye tracking lab in 4S102. And there's some general information, how you learn to read in Russian. And I'm telling you that this is a long study. It's going to be 1 hour and 30 minutes in total. And here is the experimental procedure. So first I'm asking you to fill out a questionnaire, and then you'll read 72 sentences in Russian, answer comprehension questions, and I will record your eye movements in the process because that's what I do. And for those people who were participating in this study as a part of the SONA system for Psych 100 would receive 3 research participation credits because it's 1 credit for each half hour, and they're worth 100, well, 1 hour and 30 minutes. So here is things that you need to know, risks. I'm saying no known risks. We are not allowed to say that there is no risk because everything can be risky these days. But I'm saying that if you don't want to continue at any point, you can just say so. And I'm telling you as a participant, the kind of a general language of what the eye tracker is in case you want to know. So we're saying that this is a special device that has 2 miniature cameras and so on. So there is a little description of the equipment, and it's remote. So you're not wearing anything on your head. You're just looking at the screen, and the camera is underneath the screen. And then I say that whatever you're doing is going to be anonymous and confidential, and it will be locked up in my cabinet, and nobody will have access to that. If we publish, of course, that's what we do. Your name won't be mentioned anywhere. And we also suggest to people, of course, some people take us up on this and then email us 3 days later saying, oh, can I have the paper? It's like, I'm sorry, the paper will be ready in a year. And finally, the last page is there are questions, although of course, I'm supposed to give my phone number, but I'm there so people can ask me, or they can talk to the Institutional Review Board, IRB administrator, and we'll talk about IRB soon. And finally, this is the most important thing, is that the participant actually signs, right? And here, by signing, that means that the participant read and understood the form, he or she asked questions and received answers, and understood the risks and benefits of participating in the study. So you can imagine what this kind of, and obviously this is my signature where I say that I've explained everything. You can imagine what this consent form would have looked like for this Tuskegee syphilis study. Nothing like that was given to the participants. All right, let's go back to the slides. Right. The second part of that principle, respect for persons. So obviously, in the Tuskegee syphilis study, there were no consent forms. Nothing was explained to these people. They were not treated as autonomous agents. Agents that could consent or not consent to participate in the study. But the second part has to do with special populations. Imagine that, and I do that, I work with children. Now, I can't really, I mean, I will ask a 5-year-old whether he or she participated in my study, but I can't do that without the parents' consent. So parents are the ones who will sort of think about whether they want a child to participate. Other vulnerable groups, if you guys have done the city training, include inmates, include people with diminished mental capacities, sometimes bilingual people whose English is not there or it's not good. So then all the documents have to be provided in the language that these people speak. So that gives these vulnerable groups a choice to be an autonomous agent through the proxy, through somebody who can understand the risks and benefits. All right, the second principle is beneficence, right? And beneficence really, it's very simple. It's do no harm. Make sure that your participants are well taken care of. Your well-being is at the core of your approach to the study. Again, think about the Tuskegee participants. There was a lot of harm that was caused to them, mostly because the syphilis in their bodies was not treated, especially from 1943 when penicillin became a drug of choice for this kind of disease. So well-being of participants was not at the heart of the study. Whatever we've learned about syphilis from 40 years of suffering of these people does not justify the kind of harm that they went through. All right. Finally, our third principle, that's the Belmont report that we're talking about, is the balance between the harm that can come to participants because of participation and the benefits to the society or to other groups of people and so on. So justice means that you cannot just frivolously choose a particular group and study them. So for example, you could say, there is this large inmate population in prisons. They don't have much to do, perhaps. Why don't I go and study them? And especially if this is something that requires some kind of medical procedures, right? They're a captive audience. But justice means that we need to spread the harm, deception, or whatever else might be in the study, if it is justified, across the population. In that sense, not if there were African-American men who were participants of the Tuskegee syphilis study, but the entire society benefited, including the whites and everybody else. So they should have been included in the study as well, and they should have been undergoing these procedures. So this balance between the good that comes from the study and the bad that can be a part of it, sometimes we can't avoid doing that, has to be established. And usually we're looking for benefits for the entire society to benefit from all sections of the society participating in the study and sort of sharing the burden, so to speak. But again, in the Tuskegee study, that was not the case. Our next component that's discussed in the textbook, and I'll just mention it again for a few minutes, and we may do an activity on Thursday if we have time, is the famous Milgram's obedience study. And the reason why this one is important, because the harm that was caused to participants in the study, if it were the harm, was psychological, was not physical. It wasn't the way that the Tuskegee syphilis study was conducted. It was kind of different. So Stanley Milgram in the 1960s and 1970s actually performed a series of experiments. We talk usually about one of them, where he wanted to know whether people will comply with authorities in mistreating other people. Now, we would think about ourselves that we are moral people, that we don't want to cause anybody harm or discomfort or whatever. So we think of ourselves as having the integrity that would allow us to withstand the pressure of this type. And the interesting point is, although this is from 1960s, 1970s, it actually has a very important implications for a few of the past but relatively recent events, and for something that continues to go on, especially when we talk about military and war actions. So these are the two main publications that came from Milgram's lab. Like I said, because there was a series of studies, not just one, where Milgram manipulated certain factors to see if they would change the way people would obey the authorities. That's why it's called the obedience study. So what happened, it was conducted in Yale, and Yale is in New Haven. Perhaps you guys know It's not too far from New York City. It's about an hour and a half. So there were, again, leaflets. These are the days before the computers, in which people from any walk of life and basically any age of 18 and above were invited to take part in a study. Now, that person who got the leaflet and decided wanted to participate would come to the lab, and he or she would be assigned a teacher's role, and that's the participant's role in the study. But there was also another person, actually more than one, but another person who was called the learner. And this learner was actually what we call in psychology confederate. A confederate is somebody who's working for the experimenter. So my graduate student doing our research is my confederate. She knows what the experiment is about. But the teacher was a member of the community at large. I had no idea that this learner, because the learner was there already, and the teacher walks into the lab and he sees another person there, and they're being introduced by the experimenter, who says, hey guys, one of you will be a teacher, the other one will be a learner, and we'll establish that by throwing a coin. But of course the coin was rigged, so the actual participant was always assigned the role of the teacher. And the way it looked like, there was a wall. Let's see, I think I must have a picture, right? Right. There was a wall between the two of them. This guy in suspenders and glasses is that confederate. That's the learner, okay? And the actual teacher is sort of behind that glass in there. He or she does not see the learner. Now, you guys don't see that because I will post it for you, or we'll have a look at it on Thursday. There was a tape recorder right here where everything, all the learners' reactions were pre-recorded. But the teacher was in front of the very scary looking apparatus that had a bunch of like switches, really. So each switch would supposedly, as you can see, the learner is strapped into some kind of a contraption that would supposedly deliver electric shock. So the teacher's job was to say out 4 words. The learner could hear them, and then ask the learner to repeat these words. And if the learner could not do that, then the teacher was asked to administer an electric shock by pushing one of the switches. And the switches went from 10 volts to 450 volts. Does anybody know anything about electricity? Does anybody know what 450 volts will do to you? All right, I'll leave it to you to find out what 450 volts will do to a human body. So for the first few trials, 5 or so, the learner was very successful. He would repeat all 4 words, and then he will start making errors. And for each error, the teacher was supposed to flip a switch, and the volume would increase with every switch. Not only the switches were labeled for those watts, but they also were labeled in terms of what kind of electric shock the learner will receive. So the first number of them would say mild electric shock, then there will be sort of medium strength, then it would say severe, and then the last component of 5 or 10 switches, I don't remember how many, said danger, severe shock, meaning that, think before you do that. So the idea was to see how far these teachers, these participants will go. Because each time the learner made a mistake, they experiment. You see the guy in the white coat. In fact, Stanley Milgram was an experimenter on many occasions. It's not him now, but in general. The experimenter would sternly say, teacher, follow the protocol, administer the shock. That is, he is wearing a white coat, right? He's an authority. He's telling you as a participant what to do. And the main dependent variable was to see at which point the teacher will stop. The teacher will say, you know what, I'm not playing in this game anymore. And of course, I didn't say that, but at some point, the our learner, obviously it's all pre-recorded on the tape recorder, would start screaming, saying, stop, you're hurting me. And at some point a little later, he says, oh, I can't take it any longer. I actually have a heart condition. Stop. And then he would become silent completely. So the idea was to see at which switch will the teacher stop. Good. Jeremiah says he remembers it from Psych 100. Okay, excellent. So you guys, those of you who haven't read or even read, think about either, well, yourself or somebody else. Where do you think between 0 and 450 volts will people stop? Just type your answer in the chat. Eileen says 100. Sadiro says 200. Didi says 130. Vanessa 160. All right. Good, good. So note that the highest, Rita says 150. Okay, you guys are very nice. You were saying that, and Seaver says, I think some participants would go all the way. Okay, Seaver, here is a question to you. Give me the percentage of people who went all the way to 450 volts, in your opinion. Okay, Seaver says 15 to 20. Would you be shocked to know that 65% of people went all the way up? After the learner screamed and said that he has a heart condition, he can't take it anymore, and then became silent, he could have died, right? The teacher doesn't know that learner is actually Confederate. So 65% of participants in many, like I said, it was a series of experiments, went all the way to the very last switch. And I suggest that you watch that. Jeremiah says he's not surprised. Well, here, right, the 10th level, this question was actually posited by Milgram to 40 psychiatrists, just like I posited to you, saying, what do you think? How many people will go beyond this 10th level, in this case, 150 volts? So that's almost what many of you suggested, 130, 160, all right? So, and what's interesting, the last point on the slide is really interesting, right? Wouldn't you expect that women would be more gentle? I'm looking for a nice word. Jeremiah says he would go all the way. Well, you know, we don't know. But there was no difference between men and women, for example. So out of the 65% of people who went all the way to the end, there were approximately equal number of men and women. That's one other thing that is amazing. Let's finish the Milgram study and then take a little break. Women can't be evil. Jeremiah, do you have somebody in mind? Anyway, so additional studies that Milgram conducted, yes, okay, had to do with, for example, the experimenter was in the room with the teacher, with the participant, or could talk to him or her on the phone. Okay, in those days, you could use the regular phone. They also manipulated how much of an authority the experimenter was. Imagine Stanley Milgram, who says, hello, I'm a professor of psychology at the Department of Psychology at Yale University, versus I'm a graduate student, right? They also created a situation when a new person was sort of coming into the study and could observe the previous participant and see if that would induce that person to stop early if the person in the room stopped. Of course, they didn't know whether that would happen. All of these affected the experiment. So let me ask you one question before we take a break. In the situation when the experimenter was removed from the room, he was not in the room with the participant, with the teacher, but only communicated with him on the phone. What happened to this number of people who went all the way to 450 volts? You can either type in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Seaver says the percentage would decrease. Anybody else who thinks that it would decrease or would stay the same or would increase? Eileen and Jenny all say decrease. Can somebody, before we take a break, unmute themselves and give us the reason why you think a bunch of people agreed? Joanna, Rita, Jenny, Eileen. Jenny, would you be interested in talking to us for a minute? No? Oh, Seaver, you're
Yeah,
ready to?
I was
Go ahead.
thinking maybe there's, I don't want to throw around this word correlation as if I'm like really confident in it, but I feel like if there's the proctor or the authority in the room with you, you can, as the participant, as the teacher, you have a crutch to lean on this person's authority or this voice. But if they're not in the room, you're kind of in a position to make your own moral decision. I know you mentioned that they were, on the phone, but I feel like the physical presence might cause you to, say like, all right, I'm going to keep going because this person is next to me. But when the person is not in the room, you kind of mentally like make the decision on yourself, like, okay, I'm seriously hurting this person. I'm going to stop.
Good. I totally agree with you. I think the way you would think when somebody is present and this person is the authority, you kind of push the blame on him as if you were just an instrument. But when this person, the experimentee, is not in the room, then the decision is on you. And in this case, you may be more inclined to say, I'm going to be good. All right, guys, it's 17:37. Let's take a break until 17:45, which means we have 8 minutes. I'm staying here. If somebody wants to talk to me, ask me a question, either about the stuff or about the class in general, unmute yourself. Otherwise, we will reconvene. So go have a smoke or a drink or whatever you want to do. Come back at 5:45, not 17. Of course, I'm using the European time. 5:45. Come back at 5:45. Okay, who had a question? Rita, was it you?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I have a question about the syphilis research.
Uh-huh.
So the doctors who did the research, were they punished or they kept on doing the other researches? Like, were they given any kind of punishment for doing, this unethical kind of research?
No, it was not considered unethical until 1974. And at this point, so many doctors rotated through the team. It went on for 40 years. And they could always use this kind of thinking that I wasn't the one, whoever was in charge of the team, I was just doing my job. It's an easy way to sort of get away from the responsibility. So no, nobody was punished.
So they kept on doing more researches?
Well, they went on to do other things, but this syphilis study was over. Did these people continue doing that? I doubt that, because the Belmont report was 1974. So after that, it became much more difficult. Okay, Seaver, go ahead. Ask your question.
Hi, Professor Secarina. Sorry to cut into your break, our 8-minute break.
No. It's not a break for me. It's a break for you.
Okay, great. Two totally unrelated questions. The first one, if we were to respond to this synchronous lecture today, would we, and I'm sorry, I'm still getting used to, I know we're heading into week 2 or week 3. Would we post our response into the September 8 to 10 discussion board, if that makes sense?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes. So this is week 2. So whatever you're doing in terms of your participation is for week 2. So you just create a thread and you say a response to Tuesday lecture or something like that. And there
Understood.
you will post whatever you want to discuss. Like I said, it could be a summary, it could be a question, it could be your, musings about the ethics. Maybe you have a story that you want to tell. I'm flexible. I would like you to be involved. Like I said before, this is considered to be a difficult and kind of boring class. So let's make it as much fun as we can.
Awesome.
No,
Okay. Yeah. No, totally understood. And then I know I was kind of reviewing the schedule with my I'm part of group 1 with Jasmine and Rita, and we were looking at the schedule and the rubric for assignment 1, and I saw on the schedule that we as a class might have an opportunity to work on assignment 1 on September 17th, but we were kind of asking ourselves, like, what would you suggest if you can of a group to kind of get the ball rolling? I mean, we were thinking about deconstructing what's asked of us and maybe finding some topics to write about. Does that kind of sound like a good way to get started? I know every group can approach this differently. We just want to get a head start on
right. It's not, there is no sort of right and wrong answer in a way. Sometimes here's the problem, Seaver, and I think it's many people can relate to that. If you're not following mass media in a certain way, then how do you come up with a topic?
Yeah.
So sometimes you just stumble upon it because it happened. So something that caught your attention, and you have to read something, like maybe you have to read New York Times, or maybe you have to read Psychology Today, which is a mass media magazine. It's not a scientific journal. Oh, thank you. It's nice to see you.
I know it's nice to see people sometimes. I just realized, sorry.
That's okay. I mean, I'm used to talking to Malevich's black squares, but it's nice. So that's one possibility. If you are reading anything current anywhere, if you're listening to, blogs or something, that could be a source of an idea. The other possibility is to look up the sites that have sort of psychological and health advice, like MSN, it's news. There is like Men's Health. There is a magazine like this. So they would suggest things that men can do to improve their psychological well-being. And usually journalists don't come up with the ideas themselves. They take these ideas from an actual research. So if you were to approach assignment 1 through your own interests, you may be fumbling around because you'll be looking for a mass media piece. So perhaps a better way in a sense, an easier way, is to start with something in mass media that's already available. But the question is, how do you get to that mass media? Well, you have to be involved with it. I mean, you have to read it, you have to look at it. One possibility is this publisher's materials on the Blackboard, and there is this second, I think it's like a second, a third tab in there that's called a research methods blog. And that's the blog that Beth Morling herself, the author of the book.
Okay.
So what she has done over a period of years, I mean, this book is relatively recent, it's only a few years, that when she would see something in the news, she would post it. So a little bit of cheating is okay. The one thing that I do not want you to do is to take the stuff from the textbook, obviously, because that's not your own work. and I'm asking you to do it already relatively early, if you could, for each of you, all three, Jasmine, and who's your third person?
Rita.
Rita. Okay, so Jasmine, Rita, and you each should go your own ways and find something.
Mhm.
And then on the 17th, that's the whole idea, is that you can get together in a group and I'll be present so you can ask me questions. You will look through the 3 media pieces and 3 research articles that you will have to identify by then and decide which one of these 3 appeals to all 3 of you or is doable. And when I mean doable, it's not the media piece that's difficult. It's the research article that may be difficult. It may be long. It may have a particular method that you're not familiar with. Anything that's neuroscientific should be off the table just because you can't really describe it successfully. And it should be short. So sometimes something from psychological science, that's the journal that our library carries electronically. And psychological science has very short articles, 4 to 5 pages. Um, uh, Let me give you an example, and then we have to get back to
Okay, great.
what we're doing. For example, just a few years ago, 2 psychologists or cognitive psychologists came up with this idea of calling the testing effect. So the testing effect means that instead of asking people just to read the chapter, let's say in the textbook, you actually give them tests or quizzes. This is what I do, because that helps them. And especially important that these tests and quizzes precede the explanation. So you guess, you predict. So a lot of journalists sort of jumped on that. Think about the Einstein baby Mozart effect.
Mhm.
Think about what else? Whether you should take notes with your laptop, on your laptop, or writing them by hand. So anything that is sort of general interest to people is picked up by journalists, and then they start talking about it. All right?
All right. And do I
Okay.
know we're going to get started. Do I remember you saying that in the example papers that you sent, like report A is like a good thing to refer to, and report C was like a not
Yeah.
so good?
A and C refer to the grades. So
Gotcha.
A is
Okay.
an A report and C is a C report. All
Got it.
right, Sever, let's get back
Okay, great.
to where we are.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you for putting yourself on the screen so I can
No
talk to you. All right. So that's the conclusion. Now, here is the reason why I thought we need to continue to talk about Milgram, although it's been 60 years since his research. So perhaps those of you who followed, some of you are too young, but you heard about the Abu Ghraib prison story in Iraq. So the Abu Ghraib prison was about 20 miles from Baghdad, and when the Iraqis fled, they left this prison in shambles. So the U.S. troops came to the prison and they renovated it and started using it for Iraqi prisoners. Now, what happened in the population of the prison, that there were just people who were random people. They were just picked up during curfew on the highway. Many women, many teenagers. Then there were people who had maybe some connections to the Iraqi forces. And then there was a very small sliver of actual criminals that needed to be there. So what happened, as you can see on these pictures, so here's the picture on the left of one of the Iraqi prisoners who is being told that he will be electrocuted. You can't see that, but he's standing on the box. So he will be electrocuted if he falls off the box. Now, of course, he can't see anything because he's wearing this hood, but you can see that there are those cables sort of going to his hands. Of course, for this particular case, the strength of this current wasn't anything close to being dangerous, but this prisoner didn't know that. Here's another very famous story. This is Private England, that's her last name, who, as you can see, was humiliating Iraqi male prisoners. She was, as well as I think 7 other people from that prison, were on trial in 2005 and received various sentences for inhumane and cruel treatment of prisoners. Now, they were doing this perhaps for the same reason as the teachers in Milgram's study were doing this. Yeah, they are the military. They are there for a reason, but it's the officers, the highly superior people above them. They are the ones who tell them, "Hey, do something." So Milgram's study and his obedience to authority lives on and continues to live on in various places where we have military conflicts. So it's very important. And if you look at a slightly, well, not slightly older, but a more recent article by somebody whose name is Berger, who decided to actually replicate a Milgram study in 2009. So what will happen now, 1960s, 1965 versus 2009? Aren't people going to be more resistant to authority? And note, this is an interesting way to think about it, how many changes were actually made. That is, the top was still 450, but they decided, the Berger and his team decided that they will stop at 150 because what they found from the Milgram study, whatever the number, I think was like 75 or 80% of people who went beyond 150 went all the way to 450. So they thought, we will only take people to 150, that is, and then we will stop. And we will assume, based on what we know from the Milgram studies, that they will go all the way to the end. They also, interestingly, that if you think about it, don't you think that potentially some of these participants were sadists just by their nature? Some people are. So in this case, the participants were screened by psychiatrists to make sure that no wackos got through. So so those who did not pass the screening were not allowed to participate. And there were a bunch of other things. And the experimenter was not just a plain person, but was a clinical psychologist who just followed the teacher throughout the experiment very carefully and was ready to kind of pull that person away if we could see the distress. Interestingly, debriefing occurred immediately. Now, Milgram's participants were debriefed, but in a funny way. They were debriefed by mail sometime later. Interesting. So the Institutional Review Board, that's the abbreviation for IRB, at the Santa Clara University in California, approved the study. Now, question is, did Berger replicate Milgram's results? Or did he find that people were more resistant to authorities? Again, you guys could type in the chat, tell me what you think. Jeremiah, the question is whether Berger's results replicate Milgram's results. That is, did 65% of participants went all the way up or not? It's almost 50 years later. Okay, Rita says that we're almost the same. Seaver, I think because it was a different era, maybe less. Okay. Other people chime in. Thomas, Jenny. Sadiru, Vanessa, Skyla, Monica. I think the same, Eileen says. Okay. Victoria? Kim? Devin Joy. Okay. Irving. Yeah, please. Norma. Good. The same. Kimberly. Same. Good. Good. Your intuitions are good, guys. Yes. Again, almost the same number of people went all the way to the end. That is, people continue to obey the authority even in 2009. I don't know if knowing about Milgram obedience studies could actually help. If you educate people about that, whether that would um, make a difference. It's interesting. Okay, so may not do anything about that. So let's move on to the second part of our recent work, and that is APA Ethics Code. There are 5 major principles. The 3 of them should look familiar to you guys because that's the same 3 principles from the Belmont report: autonomy, beneficence, and justice. There is 2 more: integrity and fidelity, and the explanation is in the textbook. What page is that? Page 100. So fidelity means we establish the relationship of trust. We behave professionally. So here's an example. I could tell you that all of you must participate in my experiment, maybe not the one to learn how to read Russian, but another one, because I'm the authority. I am in a position to tell you what to do. I'm in a position to coerce you and say that your grade will be affected if you don't participate. Now, that's not an ethical behavior, so I don't do that. And then the last one is integrity. That is, we want to be truthful and honest in our relationship with our participants. So these 5 principles, let's just get to sort of repeat them again because it is important. We, in the autonomy, we allow participants to make their own decisions in terms of whether participate or not in a particular study. And we allow them to read the consent form that's usually written, and we describe the purposes of the study, risks and benefits, and we also tell them that they can withdraw from the study at any time without any sort of consequences for their refusal. Now, of course, we never want people to quit in the middle of the study, and that sometimes is difficult if the person gets tired. But we have to make sure that we give our participants autonomy, that they are the agents, that they can decide what to do. Okay, so again, remember the vulnerable populations: minors, that is students under 18, or people who are patients who have diminished capacities or cognitive impairment, like I said, inmates and sometimes bilingual people, all could be the ones who cannot exercise the autonomy. And therefore we have the representatives for these people who will sign the consent form. But we still have to, when I work with children, in addition to their parents signing the consent form, I elicit the what's called assent from the children. So I say, hey, let me tell you about what we're going to do here. It's a game and blah, 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 blah. And then at the end I say, would you like to play with us? And the child says, yes. That's the assent. The child assented to participation. And coercion is something that we shouldn't be doing. Another example of coercion would be if somebody offers you an enormous amount of money that you can't resist, especially if you are from a poor section of the society. Somebody says, well, I'll give you $300 for your participation in the syphilis study. Some people might say, hey, listen, that's a lot of money. Let me do that, even if I don't want to. That's coercion. We shouldn't be doing that even in biomedical research that could save lives. We have to convince people, have to work with them. Again, I'm just repeating the stuff because I really want you to remember these 3 principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Okay, so here, again, We're trying to maximize the benefits and minimize the harm of the studies. And the harm, like I said, could be physical, it could be psychological. So in the Tuskegee syphilis study, it's physical. In the Milgram's study, some claim it is psychological. Interestingly, there were quite a few of participants from the Milgram study who came forward a little later, and they said they had no psychological problems participating in the study and being sort of obeying the authorities. So it's a controversial issue whether this kind of psychological harm is actually universal and it applies to everybody. How do we assess the risk? Well, again, physical harm, we know what that is. That is, your health will suffer. Psychological harm could be in the form of stress. In fact, today there was an article in the New York Times, if anybody reads that, about a dental, well, was he dental? No, he was an actual dentist. So this dentist found that in June, July, and August, when he, was it a he or she, reopened, let's say it's a he, when he reopened his practice, he has been seeing lots and lots of people with cracked teeth. In fact, many times more than the same period in 2019. So why is it that people are coming to his practice with cracked teeth? Well, he hypothesized that it has to do with stress of our lives today, living under the conditions of corona, and people are in a constant stressful sort of environment, and they suffer from insomnia. And when you can't sleep, you grind your teeth, even if you don't know that you're doing this. And that could be, so psychological stress in the form, psychological harm in the form of stress can actually lead to physical harm. Sometimes we ask people to think about the traumatic events in their lives. That could be stressful too. But that's what a lot of clinical psychologists do, right? You could also lose some of your face, so to speak, right? If your behavior or your condition becomes known to the greater public, yeah, you may suffer. We know how we try to sometimes make sure that insurance doesn't know a pre-existing condition because they may not accept us. The same idea is here. Is somehow your data become available to whoever might be interested in your data. It may be loss of privacy, confidentiality for you. So we have responsibility as researchers to make sure that that doesn't happen. In this case, we conduct experiments anonymously. We don't collect names or dates or anything else that could tie your data to you. And in fact, we say that in the consent form. So, unfortunately, as you can imagine, right, there are situations when we cannot give all the information about the study ahead of the study, because what will happen is the people will behave in a certain way. They may try to play a game thinking, what is it that this experimenter wants from me? Aha, then that's what I will do. So sometimes we have to use deception. The problem is not really using a deception, that is, you're withholding the information. It's the fact that you will provide this information at the end of the experiment, called a debriefing session. So you will debrief your participants. You'll say, well, and by the way, I wasn't interested in this, although I asked you to do this. I was really interested in that. So you could imagine that in the Milgram study, in the debriefing, they would say, look, this person, the learner, was not really suffering at all. It was our confederate. It was the member of our team, so he wasn't suffering. You did not shock him. And that would have helped, right? If they had the debriefing right after the study, it would help some of the people who thought that they did something unethical. So you could balance this between the actual deception and withholding information. So white lies versus real lies. Sometimes it's a very fine line that we have to walk. And justice, again, we have to make sure that everybody bears the burden of the risks because everybody will benefit. So the Tuskegee study is an excellent example of the violation of justice because only African American men were recruited for the study. Okay, so equity, and that's a big thing. So thinking about what's going on today, again, there is some conversation about the vaccine for corona that needs to be tested in all groups of population, let's say in terms of races. Now, but what's happening, again, if you are interested, you can read about it in the news about Colorado, where there's been some debate about whether African American community would want to participate as much in the research that has to do with development of vaccine and for going through clinical trials where they need to recruit participants from all the groups, because many of African American people in those communities just don't want to trust the authorities. The results of the Tuskegee syphilis study are very fresh in their mind. Many of them don't trust the medical establishment. They think that that's not going to be good for them. So we have to live through the implications of the Tuskegee study now, when we have to develop the vaccine. And we know that certain groups, in particular African American and Latina groups, are disproportionately affected by the coronavirus. But if it's so hard to get people to volunteer to participate, of course they have to volunteer to have the vaccine tried on them. And if they don't want to, because of distrust in the community, that's a big blow to the stage 3 of clinical trials of vaccine. So finally, our standard, we have time, standard 8, it's the APA ethics code. You have it on page, let me see, I never remember, page 116 through page 119. You have the actual text from the standard 8. Okay, and there are actually 10 of them. We are not interested in all of them. We are only interested in standard 8. So these are the main points. Some of them we have already discussed, so it's going to be easy for us. So we discussed the consent form. Let's talk about institutional approval for a second, and then perhaps get to some of the other points in the ethical code of APA. So what's the institutional approval? Well, every college, every university, every industrial firm that conducts biomedical or behavioral research and receives federal grants, that is, receives money from National Institutes of Health or National Science Foundation or Department of Defense, Department of Education, have to have this institutional review board known as IRB. Now, IRB usually has 5 people in it. There's always a representative of the community. So at the CSI IRB, we have people, at least 2 people who live on Staten Island and who are not connected to the CSI. They are members of that committee. So what happens, a researcher writes a proposal, we call it a protocol, and this protocol is submitted to the IRB for review. And we have, at this point, we have 3 different categories. So one is called exempt, which means we don't need to have informed consent. We don't need anything. It's basically the kind of research, quote unquote, that doesn't require clearance with IRB. So what you guys will be doing for your assignment 2 is that kind of stuff. It's what we call practica. That is, you're doing some practical work within the confinements of the course. So if anything goes wrong with what you will do, either observation or a survey, I will be the one to go to jail, not you, which is good. That means I will be keeping a close eye on you so you don't do something. And that's an exempt. There will be no consent form for you to administer to your participants if you're doing an observation in a public place. or if you're using a survey through your social media. Now, if you're doing something more than that, if you actually are going to collect data and publish the data, then you're going to go into what we call expedited review. That's usually work that doesn't require any major, you know, harm or stress or simple things with adults. Anything that has to do with language is considered expedited, because I'm going to be asking you a bunch of questions about, you know, reading strategies. That's not very harmful to you, and so it's minimal risk. An expedited review means that only the head of the IRB reviews the protocol. Once you go beyond that, any of the other principles that we talked about, you're going to get into the full review. Then all 5 members of IRB will read your protocol, will get together and discuss it, and then perhaps we'll send you questions before they can approve. So without the approval of IRB in these 2 last categories, you cannot start your research. So we all have to go through this, with the exception of practica through classroom work. Deception, again, a very good example is a Milgram study. That's an active misrepresentation. So they didn't know that the teacher, that the learner was actually not a participant. And one could say, hey, listen, from the moral point of view, any kind of deception is bad. It's unacceptable. But we know that there are situations when we should do that, and therefore the Institutional Review Board has to take the burden on its shoulders and decide whether they would allow a researcher to use deception in the study. Social psychologists, thank God I'm not one of them, social psychologists use a lot of deception in their studies. Well, it's just because it's not always possible to create a social psychologist study without deception. But again, when people, especially in the previous years, when people abused this, using deception when they didn't have to, it actually harms the field. And so we are trying to, I mean psychologists in general, we're trying to be more ethical about that and use deception as little as possible. And that's the question, right? Is it still a major ethical problem in psychological research, which I invite you to think about. Debriefing, we already talked about it. You need to be able to tell people what you did and give them a chance to, for some experiments, we actually have a clinical psychologist on staff who would then go and talk to the participant to make sure that no psychological damage was done, like Berger's studies, replication of Milgram's research. He had a clinical psychologist on staff. Again, here's another question that you could use in your activities, in your discussions. You could think whether debriefing is enough, whether it will remove all kinds of negative effects that could come with the stress and deception in the study. I'm just, again, remember, I'm flexible. I would like you to use your own examples or do your own stuff if that's what interests you. And now, final little piece on the remaining 5 minutes is what we call the responsible conduct. And that's what I started with by saying that one thing is treatment of participants in research. The other one is you behaving as an ethical researcher. So again, as a consumers of psychological knowledge, you're not in the situation yet, but I told you, and I posted it in Blackboard as one of the activities for you to read about Diederik Stapels, who was because he was fired in 2012, was a social psychologist who not only falsified data, but actually fabricated it, which is, again, one of these things that, and he was, I told you before, he was an extremely prolific researcher. He had more than 50 articles published. So if you Google him in PsycInfo, for example, you'll see a bunch of articles that will start with the word retraction. That means the journal retracted his study, meaning that they scrapped it as if it didn't exist. And for us, for you, we have to think about academic dishonesty that comes in also in many forms, but the one that you should be mostly concerned with is cheating. That is intentional use of unauthorized materials or study aids in any academic exercise. In our case, you are allowed to use the textbook and the notes for your quizzes, but you should not use the internet and you should not use other people's help. That will constitute cheating in this class. That's why one of the things you had to do was to click true on the honors code that was posted for you last week. And finally, the thing that I'm very adamant about, and I will be making sure that you're not involved in this, is plagiarism. And it's using, that's a simple thing, it's using portions, substantial portions, that's the key word, or elements of another's work or data and present it as your own. And even if you occasionally cite the source, that's not going to be enough. The good thing is that for this class and in general in most of psychology classes, you actually don't need to cite directly, like direct quotations. We don't really use them. That kind of a citation is used in literary studies and literary criticism. So if you're taking English 151 or any other English related course, that's where you will be citing a lot. In our field, what you should do is cite by paraphrasing or by summarizing into a very short 1 or 2 sentence form. And that would be putting the name of the people in parentheses. We'll talk about it on Thursday, how to do that. All right. So plagiarism and cheating, let's not do that. So this is all the stuff that I just said. And our final, we're not going to do that. Final thing that I won't talk at all because we don't really have time and it's not going to be that relevant to our class is animal research, which is we use the word subjects, not participants. So remember, we will be working with participants only, but if you start looking at animals, they're going to be called subjects. And we have a special commission, so it's an IRB for animals called ICOOK, and that's the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. So we, at our department, we have pigeons, a bunch of them, a lot of them. We have mice and we have naked mole rats, which live in the colony in 6S on the direction of my colleague and departmental chair, Dan McCluskey. So if you're interested in doing research with animals, we are one of the very few undergraduate institutions in this country that allows you to actually be involved in research with animals. So we have a lab course, PSY201, which is learning and behavior, and that's with pigeons, where I told you perhaps before, you can train a pigeon to, you know, dance, to peck, to turn around, do other cool things using classical conditioning. Okay, so at this point, we're done. Make sure that you finish the city training if you haven't done so by Thursday. Make sure that you listen to people's self-introductions so you know who your members of the group are. People who don't have a group, there's only a few of you left. You could try to decide. The list is posted, who you would like to work with, and you can tell me on Thursday. Okay, guys, at this point, the class is over, and I will see you on Thursday. I have a mole rat. It's very
Thank
expensive.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You too.
Thank you. Have a good
All
night.
right. Take care, guys.
Take care.
See you on Thursday.
Good night, Professor. Thank you.
Professor,
Take care, Rita. Yes,
Uh,
Jeremiah.
do you have a quiz for this week?
The quiz is the city training.
Okay, so there's no chapter quiz, right?
No, there's only 5 of them, remember? And we haven't started them yet. City is one of them, but sort of separate, right? So if you're done with city, right? As I remember.
Yeah.
So you're done with the quizzes for the week.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Have a good day.
Take care. You too, Jeremiah.
Professor?
Okay. Who am I talking to?
Joanna.
Joanna. Uh-huh. Yes, Joanna. Mm-hmm.
I emailed you my city training from, I
Yes.
think, did you get it?
Let me check. Let me unshare the screen and see.
I emailed it last week, I think Thursday, I believe.
No, Joanna, could you please email it to me again? I don't see it.
Yes.
You know, CSI service sometimes does funny things. So please email it to me again, all right?
Okay,
And I'll post it
now.
on the Blackboard.
I'm sorry,
Good.
Professor Victoria. Did you receive my email with city training?
Yes, I got your city training and I posted your score.
Okay.
Victoria. Yep, you got a 10. Fantastic. Good job, Victoria.
Thank you so much. I tried.
You're
Have a
welcome.
good night.
You did well. Take care.
Hi, Professor. Before you go, it's me.
Yes,
Didi.
Didi.
Hi.
Mhm.
So I was having trouble with the city training. I only got options for the ones where you have to pay for.
Okay, so let's, do you have a minute? Can you stay put?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so let's do the following. I'm going to give you the ability to share screen. Oops, where are we? Participants. Okay, more. I'm going to make you a co-host, which means you will be able to share screen. Do you want? Yes, I do. So now go to the city training website and share the screen with me.
Okay, let me see.
Take your time.
I have to go on Blackboard. I'm sorry, I just have to log into my Blackboard and follow the link.
No problem. I'm here.
How's your day going?
No, I don't know. Teaching online is not fun.
Yeah,
I can't see you. I mean, technically, I could ask you to have your video on, but it's not the same, as you know.
Yeah, I know.
It takes a lot of time from you, and it takes away a lot of time from me. So I don't like it. I can do it.
Okay, I'm here now. How do I
Uh-huh.
share?
So now, you see there is a little green button at the bottom says share screen.
I see it. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. So if you click on that and then click on the blue button that says find the view that you want to share with me and click the blue button on the right.
Okay. The blue one that says share?
Yep.
Okay, can you see my screen
Good.
now?
Yeah, yes, I can. Okay, very good. So now let's log in.
Okay. I don't think I created, I think I have to register.
All right, so go to register.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and let's select your organization. To find the organization, say City University of New York.
Should I just type in CUNY?
Yeah, it could pop. Let's try CUNY and see if it works. Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Good. Now click I agree.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. All of that. Affiliation. Continue to create. So you already have it. Okay, good. Perfect.
I'm trying to type fast and it's not working out.
Don't rush. Don't rush. We're good. We're fine. So we have your email address. Okay. You have to.
I'm wondering if I should use my student email or my private Gmail because I don't remember my student email.
It doesn't matter because as long as you have to create your password anyway, so it doesn't matter. Use whichever one you think is easier for you. Gmail, okay.
Okay.
All right, so continue to step 3.
Should I put a 7 p.m. email address or just skip that?
You don't need to. Just go to step 3.
Okay.
All right, so now you have to create a username. I'm not looking. Create a username. Okay, and now create a password, right? So this information you should write down because it will be helpful for you to be able to access all of this.
Yeah. Okay, so username.
Take your time. Don't rush. I'm good.
Okay. Okay, I got it.
Good. So now create your security question. Right. Good.
Continue.
Continue to step 4.
Country of
So
residence.
country of residence obviously is US. May we contact? Say no.
Okay.
You don't need them to contact you. Go to step 5. Right. Are you interested in the option of receiving? Say no.
No, right?
Uh-huh. Okay. And then continue to step 6.
Okay.
Okay. Your language obviously is English.
I have to enter.
Does it say that you have to? Yeah, you have to use the CIX here, I think.
Okay. At CIX dot
CSI.cuny.edu.
I always get confused. Okay.
So now repeat that. All right.
Asking for a lot of information. Please ensure that you
Correctly. You did. You did.
Okay.
Okay. His degree is high school.
High school.
Yeah. And now you have your Dolphin ID, right? You don't need that. You don't need that. That's not for you. Go to department, say psychology.
Okay.
All right. And your role in research is an undergraduate student. Undergraduate. Okay, good. You don't need any of that. Skip. If you don't see a red star, you don't need to do office phone number. Type in something. No. 718, the departmental number 952 3753 or something like that. Yeah. Perfect.
Oh boy, what happened here?
Indicate they didn't like it, so wouldn't like.
They didn't like my email?
Is that?
Yes,
No, scroll down. Is it? It should be, I think, set out in red.
Yeah,
it's your email. Maybe because you put the Duduzile in the capital first and not in the capital in the second one. Okay, good. Let's see if that works. Go to step 7.
Okay, there we go.
It worked. Fantastic. You can skip the COVID. Not at this time. You don't need it because we're not going to campus. Go to next. Okay, choose. So this is where we are doing it. We're doing human. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Human subjects basic course. Yes, this one. Click next. All right. Choose your human subject research for undergraduate students, number 1.
Okay.
Yep. Click next. Finalize registration. Click that. Okay, institutional courses, view courses, yeah. And start now. Yay!
Oh, okay, perfect.
So I think your problem was when you were in that choice of extra credit for professional development, you probably said yes there.
Yes.
And that might be why. So now what you can do, you can log out and come back and do it whenever you're ready. Okay, as long as you do it by 4 p.m. on Thursday. And then you have to send me the certificate, the one that has the score. That's the one that I need.
Screenshot it, or is there a way to?
No, it will be an actual certificate that you can save and send to me.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. Of course. See you on Thursday.
The highest score is 10, right?
100, which will be
100.
translated to 10. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
So thank you. Bye.